Good day, YouTube. I'll do one back for another video for the pagan perspective. This week's topic is what do we know about, or how do we feel about the idea of the first witch? Do we know about any myths and things of that nature that would connect to the idea of the first witch? And the first thing I want to say about the idea of the first witch is that it's a very loaded question because what are you talking about? Like, are you talking about the first witch in America, the first witch in Europe, the first witch of all time? Because there's so many different ways you can look at this. I mean, just on the surface, the idea of the word witch can be translated into so many things. There's an African word for it. There is an Italian word for it. There's many different Asian languages where the word witch is incorporated. And just the idea of the first witch can kind of offend some people, and then it can kind of make other people feel weird. So just to dive into it, just to talk about the idea of the first witch. I think we need to talk about civilization and just the beginning of where everything came from. And of course, I'm talking about the idea of Africa. As we know, and scientists have proven time and time again, that the cradle of life is Africa. I have an article here in front of me, and I'm going to put in front of you down below the evidence in a cave where there was a group of people in Botswana 70,000 years ago worshiping a snake god. That's technically paganism, and the article even goes even further and says that these people were worshiping this snake god almost 30,000 years before there was any paganism or any similar religion in Europe. And this may be shocking to others, but people who are students of history will know that Africa was where everybody crawled out of. So when it comes to the first witch, in my mind, it's going to be in the lineage of someone who comes from Africa, the beginning of civilization, and then later on, other people, other cultures, they inherited the term witch, or they continued the lineage of magic work, I should say. So, if we're talking about here in America, of course, the Salem trials comes to mind. I know people who are familiar with Tituba. It's said that Tituba taught who was an African American, someone who was stolen from Africa and made to work here for free, taught her ways to the European women in her town. And this is where you have the idea of Salem. So certain stories have talked about it, certain movies have talked about Tituba, and then in some cases they completely forget about Tituba completely. So it's going to be if you're asking me about my ideas of myths for the first witch, I'm not really giving you myths. I'm giving you scientific evidence of where civilization began and how we arrived today, where so many different cultures. And it's not just African. Even though African is the beginning in my mind of all of this, there are other things. I mean, some of our earliest writings, cuneiform, Sumerian, several thousand years ago, we have magic being used up in the northern part of Africa, Egypt. The first religion, shamanism, was used by Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan conquered more land than any body, even to this day, even more than Alexander the Great, under the religion of shamanism. So there are a lot of ways you can look at who is the first witch. I will say this, that a lot of people will probably call witch or a similar word in translation when they did things such as heal wounds. For example, if you have a wound that has gone untreated, unclean, they begin to fester, they begin to smell, they stink, and usually in those days, in those medieval days or those older tribal days, if you didn't have a healer with someone who could be considered a witch, if you didn't have them with you, that wound, that smell would basically mean it's time to start making peace and it's time to go ahead and say your goodbyes. Well, someone who is a healer would create some kind of salve or balm, and then that would go onto the wound, and usually they would recover rapidly. Sometimes this would take place in a hut of some type, and people would observe this sick, stinking smelling person go into a hut. A day or two later, they emerge completely healthy. Does this sound familiar? Sounds a little bit like Christ going into the rock, and then days later he's gone. people looked at that as a divine thing in that instance. But in other cases, people say, oh my gosh, who is this woman? Who is this man who's healing people? This person smelled like a corpse, but now they're alive. Does this also sound familiar? Sounds a little bit like zombieism, where you get into voodoo and things. So there's so many different ways you can look at this question. But people who are usually healers, midwives, people who heal the sick, deal with mental issues, ways of calming animals by no more than just using herbs such as lavender and things, all these people have been considered witches throughout the years, men and women through generations. So it's a very hard question to answer if you don't want to like look at it from a scientific aspect. If you want to look at it from a myth realm of things, there's so many different backgrounds, there's so many rich cultures, so many stories of witchcraft. It's so hard to say who is the first witch. But if you ask me, I would go with the science thing. I would go from the science particular standpoint, and just to attack the question from there, to understand where people came from, where we all came from, where you come from listening, looking at this right now. According to scientists, that is Africa. So to me, the first witches would be Africans, and it would be people who practice pagan-based religions from that country. Botswana is one of them. Benin, as we know, is Benin and Tongo, which is which is basically the cradle Haitian voodoo. So these are things that we all have some kind of tie, some kind of connection to, and it's a very, very big, broad question. I love the question. I actually want to see more hard questions like this because it's kind of hard to like attack it from one point. I know it can be drawn out. I know that people can read the myths and go on and on, but I guess the core of it, that's the major thing. I really want to know what you guys think. And read those articles I have down there. Let me know what you think of them. If you have something that's better or something that conflicts, go ahead and throw them down there. Let's have a friendly conversation about what you have, and I would love to know what you think about this question. Next week is Subs Week, so I won't be here, but I'll be here the week after next, and I will see you all then. Thanks for watching, and blessed be.